Welcome in to the Notre Dame Virginia post-game show. I'm here as always with my co-host Ben Belden. After a Notre Dame victory over the Virginia Cavaliers on the road at night, 28-3. Interesting game, obviously, and we'll touch on that and kind of Notre Dame's future here moving forward. With I think me and you both agree the likelihood that they'll probably finish 11-1 on the regular season. With a home game against Georgia Tech this upcoming weekend and a finish to the season at Stanford, and a team that's not very good in Stanford. But just kind of touching on today's game, obviously super interesting game overall. I mean, Virginia came in as one of the most prolific offenses in college football this season, albeit without their starting quarterback in Brennan Armstrong. But at the same time, if you would have asked me before the game started that they would put up essentially a zero spot, and certainly no touchdowns, I would have said that there's no chance. Notre Dame's defense has been shaky at times this season, and with that said, I don't think you go from being maybe the best offense in college football, at least statistically speaking, to what they put on display today at home, nonetheless. So, Ben, let's maybe hear some of your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, Nathan. I'm with you that regardless of who played quarterback for them, I didn't really think that Notre Dame would essentially pitch a shutout like you said. And by the way, I hate that Bronco Mendenhall called for that field goal there, but I don't know. Like, that's just not what I would do in that particular situation. But whatever makes you feel better, I guess. But yeah, I mean, usually when about the the top offense in college football, it has a lot more to do. I mean, certainly your quarterback is a big part of that, and Brennan Armstrong's a very good one. However, that also generally means that you've got 10 other guys and really more like 15 other guys who are dudes on the offensive side of the football as well. And so, I definitely agree with you that, a great performance from the Notre Dame defense to shut down the Virginia offense. Very impressed with that. Generally also impressed with a lot of what I saw on the offensive side of the football. I know that people, on Twitter as we speak, who are probably talking about how Notre Dame's offense sputtered at times during this game, and certainly there's something to be said for that. However, I would generally say that what I saw out of Notre Dame was, balance and the running game was good. The Jack Cohn was good at times. I liked what I saw from Tyler Buckner before the fumble, certainly. Logan Diggs was, flashed again. I love that kid. So, lots of good things overall. I mean, certainly, not a perfect football game, but at the same time, if you're talking about, and I feel like this is a theme that you and I say all the time, we're talking about some imperfections after 28-3 win. And that certainly makes it a lot better to talk about some of those things.
Yeah, and as some of the eyes sort of trickle in on the post-game show, just obviously you guys are listening to the Notre Dame post-game show here on the Voice of College Football. Me and Ben are going over a 28-3 victory over Virginia. And I agree with a lot of what you said, Ben. I mean, Notre Dame probably could have put up. I mean, like I said, they won 28-3. They probably should have won 45-3 or something close to that. You had the fourth down miscue, I think, on the first drive of the game, which seems to be a trend these days. And I think you actually tweeted about that right when it happened. Obviously the Tyler Buckner, Logan Diggs, sputter fumble, on that second to last drive of the game. And then obviously the missed fourth down on the last drive of the game. And then there were probably several others in there. I'm not exactly sure how many drives they had versus how many times they scored. I know they punted at least one time in there as well. But yeah, so it could have easily been a 45-3 game or so, but that's also football. And I know Notre Dame fans are sort of accustomed to quote unquote not blowing teams out per se, but I would say a 28-3 victory is blowing someone out overall. And to your point in regards to just the overall balance of the offense. I mean, I think they had close to 270, 280 yards rushing today. Actually, no, I think it kind of ended up being around 250 or so, but that's a really, really good rushing day. And then Cone, even though he only threw for 150 yards or so, he also had 3 touchdowns. So they were able to score through the air. And then you probably had one taken away from Lorenzo Styles, though I think they ended up scoring on that drive anyway. And several other things. So overall, I mean, it's hard to be upset with the team in general, and certainly the defense really showed out today. And one thing I really wanted to point out in regards to the Virginia offense specifically, because you're going to have people come in and say, well, they should have, or Brennan Armstrong didn't play, so of course Virginia is not gonna do well. They're not gonna. This isn't a good win for Notre Dame, I guess is what I'm really getting at. But I would argue almost the opposite. And in reality, like you mentioned, I mean, this Virginia offense had, I think 4 or 5 wide receivers that had terrific stats, and to a certain extent, maybe you argue that Brennan Armstrong was those guys were making Brennan Armstrong better, at least coming into the game. And maybe that tends to be the opposite now, but at the same time, they had weapons all over the field, and whoever's at quarterback, should have been able to get them the ball. And maybe it makes you appreciate Notre Dame's quarterback situation a little bit better as well, or some of the other teams in the country where Drew Pine was able to come in at times this year and produce. Tyler Buckner's been able to come in at times and produce. So, maybe it's something to say about Virginia's recruiting or Virginia's just QB situation in general, that they have to rely on one specific player for their offense to be as good as it was throughout the entire season until today.
Yeah, I mean, I had that thought that you kind of just mentioned, about taking the Notre Dame quarterback situation or the Notre Dame offense just kind of in general for granted. I think that's a really great point that you just made, that, as quote unquote bad as Notre Dame's offense has been, going through what it's gone through at the quarterback position. And I don't even feel right exactly calling it bad. I mean, I know I used the little air quotes thing here, but like as bad as people say it's been, let's put it that way. That makes me a little bit better. It's still been, even when it was at its worst, it was still better than that. And Virginia is, like you mentioned, statistically one of the top offenses in college football. So, I guess it does make you feel a little bit better as a Notre Dame fan. And really, I mean, you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about this is still a quality win, regardless of who was playing quarterback for Virginia. I mean, this is still a quality win for Notre Dame, a quality performance by the defensive side of the football, a good enough performance on the offensive side of the football. I think you can continue to see, if you're talking about the offensive side of the football, I think you can continue to see the steps that Notre Dame takes every week in, throwing in a couple different wrinkles. I mean, the Lorenzo Styles play that you talked about, you love to see that type of stuff. I love the Braden Lindsey touchdown play. I loved that one. And then I loved the reverse that they ran for him as well early there in the third quarter. It seems like every week you sort of see kind of more wrinkles to the Notre Dame offense. And then now more so than at the beginning of the year. And maybe this is a product of offensive line play a little bit as well. But, Kyron Williams, Logan Diggs, the ball handlers in general for Notre Dame are just making plays in a way that, we didn't see early on. And like I say, I think that's a product of the offensive line a bit, and a product of confidence a little bit more. And so, things are trending in the right direction for Notre Dame, really on both sides of the football.
Probably a product of Kyron Williams possibly being the best running back in college football too. I think I saw a statistic. I think it was during the game they threw up a stat where he had 70 yards at the time. I think he finished with 70 yards on 14 carries, but at the time it was like 13 carries for 70 yards, and 67 of those yards were were after contact, which is just insane when you really think about it. But while you were talking, I actually looked up what the Virginia wide receiver stats this year were, and they had Billy Kemp 579 yards coming into today. They had Jelani Woods 446 yards coming into today. Wicks, who was shown a few times as definitely their best receiver, 972 yards coming in today, and I think at the end of the game maybe even pushed over that 1,000 yards with a few catches. Rashawn Henry 493 yards. I mean, that's four guys that are essentially at 500 yards or more, and like I said, I don't want to keep beating the same drum. I think it was proven today, even with facing a good Notre Dame team, that Brennan Armstrong is significant for that offense. I really just don't want to take away from what Notre Dame did defensively specifically. I think they had 8 or 9 sacks, which is crazy, no matter who you're playing. And so, I mean, that's really what I took away from today's game. I mean, I thought the safety play without Kyle Hamilton looked at its best this year. Houston Griffith wasn't a huge part of the game plan, which was interesting coming in. You had Xavier Watson, specifically Ramon Henderson, manning sort of the Kyle Hamilton free safety role. Today, Ramon Henderson ended up with a pick. His counterpart in DJ Brown picked it off in the end zone to finish the game as well. So you had 2 picks from the safety spot, and it's looking like that position specifically, even without Kyle Hamilton on the field, is trending up, not necessarily for this season overall, but certainly for the future, because you want Kyle Hamilton back there if he's healthy.
Yeah, I'd love to see how many guys Notre Dame got in on defense. I mean, you gotta, and that's been something that, like, if you've monitored Notre Dame all year, I mean, they obviously play a lot of dudes, but I mean, Nana Osafo-Mensah was out there on the first play of the game defensively, which was, I don't know, surprising, I guess, just something you haven't seen at the very least.
I think it was because MTA was out today, and he ended up starting, yeah.
Yeah, and so, obviously without MTA and Drew White, that had something to do with it, certainly. But still, it just feels like Notre Dame played, and like I say, I don't know the number, but it feels like they played at least they're 2 deep at every position, and played about 20, 22 guys, somewhere in that ballpark. Maybe a few less than that because, you take for granted that, like I say, they had a couple guys out. But regardless, the depth on the defensive side of the football continues to wow me. I mean, you saw Riley Mills get a couple of sacks there. He's a guy that I've liked all year, a guy that I don't know, have a good feeling about, and you can kind of see why. And certainly he, got in there quite a bit because of MTA's absence as well. So, it's just interesting sometimes to see the personnel groupings. Notre Dame has a bunch of hybrid type players that kind of can play all over the field, and I love that about the defense. And it says something that they're starting to figure out how to put it all together and which groupings go best together and that type of stuff. And it really kind of came to fruition today against, like I say, I know it was a team that was down their quarterback, and we've talked about that, but still, regardless, I mean, just all over the place. Drew Wright's a really good football player. MTA is a really good football player. 2 of the best, football players on this team. So take them out of it, you would think that Notre Dame, would take a step back defensively. And in fact, I think they, like you said, played just about, probably their best defensive performance all year.
Yeah, and even though the like you mentioned, the defense has certainly had its moments this year. Injuries play a factor. Missing, three linebackers from the beginning of the season. You're out Kyle Hamilton. Now you're out, MTA and Drew White today as well. But to your point in regards to just the depth overall from the defense. I mean, you saw Prince Colley get in there a little bit at the end as well. We've already mentioned the safety position, how it seems to be possibly trending up, at least as of today or from today's game. And then the defensive line just has guy after guy. I mean, if it's not Justin Amaloa, it's Nana Osafo-Mensah. If it's not MTA or Kurt Heinisch, it's Jason Adamalola or Riley Mills, like you mentioned today, or Jacob Lacey, or Howard Cross. And I know Isaiah. I haven't even mentioned probably the best player in Isaiah Foskey, and Jordan Patello had a great play last week against Navy, and Kahanu Kia at Viper is getting in on special teams and making big time hits, and he's not necessarily in the defensive system yet, but I just named off like 15 dudes just off the top of my head, and that's really what the defense might not be there yet this year because of some injuries, but you certainly see it for the future. That's certainly the case. And, Ben, it's crazy, man. Every week I don't want to convince myself that Notre Dame has a chance to make the college football playoff. And then every week someone in front of them loses. Whether it's Oklahoma this week or Michigan State last week, Michigan losing to Michigan State the week prior to that, even though they ended up moving up in the rankings somehow. Ohio State has looked shaky at times. It's only a matter of time, you almost think, until Alabama maybe loses. I mean, I think, Ole Miss was beaten up on Texas A&M right before we hopped on. So maybe Alabama drops down a little bit. So I'm not saying I'm still not on board saying that Notre Dame is going to make the college football playoff. I would still say it's unlikely, but things are starting to happen. If Cincinnati loses, I would imagine Notre Dame probably jumps them, just like Michigan jumped Michigan State, and probably how Ohio State will eventually jump Oregon, because they'll have wins against Michigan State, Michigan, and then whoever they end up playing in the conference championship, assuming that comes to fruition. So it's, again, not saying it's going to happen, but if you would have asked me 4 weeks ago if there was a path for it, I would have said it's very, very unlikely, but some of those very unlikely things are starting to happen.
I lose track of their. Where were they last week? 9th? Is that where they were?
9th, and now they'll assuming move up to 8th for sure.
Yeah, so they're at least at 8th. We'll see what happens. Oregon and Washington State is on, at the moment. But so at least at 8th, and then next week when Michigan State and Ohio State play, one of those two teams picks up their second loss. So there they are on up to 7th. At some point, Georgia and Alabama are going to play. And so, if Georgia wins that game, Alabama's then sitting there with 2 losses. So, I mean, you start to kind of look at the teams ahead of them, and, at least 2 or 3 of them are going to end up with 2 losses before the end of the year, you would think. So, and then, obviously Ohio State and Michigan play. Well, there's the second loss for one of those 2 teams. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. I was on, our good friend Jack Lineart's podcast this week, and just kind of said that I don't know how I feel about a potential like 1-4 Notre Dame Georgia matchup in the playoff. I almost would rather just go to a New Year's Six bowl and win it than potentially going to the college football playoff and losing again. But at the same time, as I said on that podcast as well, it's also very hard to try to turn down a ticket to the dance. I mean, if you have the opportunity to go, you go, obviously. And I don't know. So you're right. It's almost a little bit early still to be talking about it. I don't know. I'm with you. Like, I don't want to think that Notre Dame is a college football playoff contender, but like, it's weird because it seems like every other year we're kind of thinking about what the scenario is because we think they can get in and they've got a chance. And this year was kind of the reverse, when they lost to Cincinnati, and even before they lost to Cincinnati, they looked like they were, this is not a college football playoff team. Like, I don't even want that. And now it's like the script is starting to flip back to what we've almost become accustomed to as Notre Dame fans. But I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. I mean, college football is just chaotic in general. So, leave it to be this year. I mean, not that I think this will happen, but I mean, a year where Notre Dame was terrible at the beginning, and this is the year that somehow they get hot really at the end and sneak in and then get into the national championship game or something. That would be something else. But anyway, that's it for my speculation on that topic.
Yeah, it also would be. It would just seems like it'd be the year that they would somehow win their first playoff game too, for whatever reason, just because of the landscape of college football right now. But at the same time, with that said, I mean, if they do end up making it, they'll probably make it as a 4 seed, and playing Georgia does not sound fun with their defense. I mean, I would maybe make the argument that their offense isn't anything spectacular, and that might play in the hands of Notre Dame where it's a close game. I think we talked about this last week, actually. Where Notre Dame, I think, at least from a keeping it close standpoint, might actually match up well with Georgia. And you never know in a close game, but at the same time, I mean, playing their defense in general is doesn't sound fun for specifically for Jack Cohn, probably with some of the struggles he has when the offensive line doesn't give him time to throw, and sometimes even when they do give him time to throw. But we're definitely getting some comments here. I'm sure you're seeing these. A lot of people are hating on the quote unquote conservative play from Notre Dame today, and the fact that they didn't end up getting to that maybe 45-3 thumping or anything like that. But I usually agree with that mindset, especially, and again, I keep saying this, but in today's college football landscape, I mean, I do think blowing a team out means something at times, and not winning some of these close games. I mean, I think you're seeing that, with the Michigan State thing. Just as an example, I know Michigan maybe hasn't blown out every team they've played, but the College Football Playoff Committee clearly feels that Michigan has had a better season so far, even with the loss head-to-head to Michigan State. And they proved that, this week when they made their rankings. And so, winning 45-3, I think, looks better on paper. But in this specific game instance for Notre Dame, I don't really feel like Notre Dame let off the gas or put their foot on the brake or anything like that. I mean, I think you can maybe argue that at the end of the first half, they should have tried to score or something like that with 1:15 or whatever it was and 2 timeouts. That I'm fully on board with. Notre Dame, there's no reason not to try to score there, especially when you moved the ball like 20 yards right before you just decided to sit on it. But at the end of the game, you had the fumble with Buckner and Diggs when they were trying to score. That would have made it 35-3 right there. And then on the drive right before that, when they gave the ball back to Cincinnati, or I almost said Cincinnati because we're talking about college football playoff stuff, but when they gave the ball back to Virginia, they went for it on 4th down and just didn't get it. And then, Cohn threw a pick on one drive. So I didn't really feel like it was just like this conservative play calling that kept Notre Dame out of the end zone. I thought that there was just some interesting tough luck, but at the same time, it just felt like a dominating victory. So it wasn't one of those things where personally, from my standpoint, I felt like there was anything wrong with what Notre Dame did today.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, they certainly left points on the board. First drive of the game continues to drive me nuts. Just in general, as a Notre Dame fan, I'm not even just talking about only this game. It just sort of seems like how many times is Notre Dame going to move the ball a lot? Here second half of the season, move the ball a lot on the first drive of the game and go down and just do something stupid like sneak the ball on 4th and 1.5 or miss a field goal or whatever the situation is. I don't know. There were points to be had out there, and I don't think. A little bit better of execution in a couple of different situations. And, we're talking about a score in the 40s more than likely, or at least the high 30s. And then I don't think people are really complaining even about the play calling before the half, which, I'll call that kind of weird because they ran the first, I don't have a problem with running the first run play to, get the clock moving a little bit, because then if things go real poorly for you, you can just kind of, sit on it and run the clock out. But they picked up 6 or 7 yards. They picked up, the first down on the next play after that, I think. And then instead of taking a shot or two to at least try to get into field goal range, they just sat on it, which was like counterintuitive to what they were doing. If you were just going to do that all along, why didn't you just take a knee? So,
Right.
I don't know. Just some weird things, certainly. But, like I say, we keep saying it in different ways. At the end of the day, they won 28-3. And it could have definitely been way worse. And, at the end of the day, I'm all right with that. How many times have we played worse teams than Virginia and not won 28-3? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, even with their quarterback situation, I would argue too. Interesting question here by Daniel De La Cruz, and we sort of touched on some of this, but it brings up a good point. I think I'm at the point as a Notre Dame fan, and I think the Notre Dame program in general, their aspirations are to win national championships. They might not be there right now. They might not have won a national championship since 1988, but I truly think that at least from a football standpoint, maybe not a university standpoint, I do think that there's arguments to be made that overall as a university, they don't care as much as the fans do about winning national championships as long as the brand remains. But Brian Kelly and the guys that they're bringing in, the coaching staff, the players, et cetera, their goal is to win a national championship every single year. And this year's no different. I do not think that if there was an opportunity to be the number 4 seed, that Notre Dame would want to turn that away, even though obviously they're not. That's not a thing that they do. But if there's a chance to play Georgia or Alabama, whoever the number 1 seed is, versus playing Michigan in the Gator Bowl or whatever, I'm absolutely taking. I'm absolutely taking the college football playoff, regardless if I think Notre Dame's going to lose 45-10 and possibly beat the opponent that they could have played in a New Year's Six Bowl with the same score, 45-10. So for me, there's not much to be said there. You take the chance to win a national championship every time, and you deal with the consequences of that loss or whatever later on.
Sure. Yeah, I'm with you there. There's a very small part of me that just thinks, I'd rather go just win a New Year's Six Bowl. But at the end of the day, if you actually ask me for my dead serious opinion, I'm with you. I think that Notre Dame's little mantra, their slogan is graduating champions, and I know they talk about there's more than one way to be considered a champion, and so I don't know. I don't know. It's frustrating to kind of be at this point, I guess, to a certain degree, because it's at some point we need to. It would be nice to just be a legitimate contender and not have to have the conversation. You know what I mean? To be a legitimate contender and not wonder if we get into the college football playoff, are we going to get drilled again? So, and I think I think Notre Dame's getting there genuinely. You look at this particular Notre Dame team, and they're not going to lose a ton between this year and next year. Obviously, they're going to lose probably Kyle Hamilton to the NFL. If he would come back, I would say that would be the shock of college football if he comes back. They're not going to have a couple offensive line players, including their best offensive line player in Jarrett Patterson. They're not going to have Jack Cohn, but you think that between now and next season, Tyler Buckner is going to really take a bunch of leaps forward. And you see freshmen playing, and you see depth on defense, and you see that Notre Dame can still be good on defense even without a Kyle Hamilton back there. So, I think we're getting there. It's just that, at some point it needs to get put together. That's not really what we started talking about. I get that, but I don't know. So, yeah, I think regardless of what happens with this particular season, the experience that these guys get is really going to be the number one thing. And whether that's playing in a college football playoff and losing or whatever, not that I want them to lose, but I think that experience is going to be valuable for them when their actual window is what I would consider legitimately open in the next 2 or 3 years.
And that brings up an interesting conversation, and not to backtrack necessarily on, or going back to the 2020 year where they did make the college football playoff and lose decisively to Alabama. The Clemson game without Trevor Lawrence, I think, proved a point that maybe some people haven't really realized yet, and that's that in a lot of aspects, Notre Dame is ready to compete for a national championship when the other team, or if they have the quarterback that some of these other teams have. And you saw that when Clemson wasn't playing possibly the best player in college football last year, in Trevor Lawrence. They matched up pretty much toe-to-toe with Clemson. For a lot of that game, they dominated in reality and kind of let them back in. And then they ended up winning in overtime. And I guess that's neither here or there. A lot of people will probably disagree with that overall. But at the same time, kind of what you said with like losing Jack Cohn, he won't be there. But in reality, I think what has kind of hindered Notre Dame from winning a national championship, at least in recent years, has been the offense, and specifically probably the quarterback position. And then also, I think maybe not having the dynamic, threats at the skill positions that some other teams have had. And next year, you might return every single wide receiver on your current roster. With Avery Davis going down, there's been some talk that he might return as a sixth-year guy. Joe Wilkins, kind of the same thing. He was injured. He could return as a fifth-year guy if he chooses to. And then not only that, but you're bringing in 2 top 100 wide receivers as recruits that could play right away. So, again, not saying that Notre Dame is going to go win a national championship next year, but it is the sort of year that could line up to that. You have what you hope is the quarterback as a dual threat option in Tyler Buckner that could maybe take that step that no other quarterback has taken at Notre Dame, at least in, like I said, recent memory. And then you might have the skill set at almost everywhere on offense that means a damn to compete with those teams. You have Kevin Austin coming back, who is sort of a de facto freshman this year with really his first college football taste. You hopefully get Braden Lindsey back as a guy that can take the top off the defense. Like I said, Avery Davis, Joe Wilkins can come back. And then you have all these young guys in Lorenzo Styles, Deion Colsey, Jaden Thomas, CJ Williams, and Tobias Merriweather, who are both commits coming in. Amorion Walker, I don't know if he sees the field next year, but he's another guy that can provide you some stuff on offense. And then I don't know, I'm not prepared to say Kyron Williams is leaving yet. Everything tells me he's leaving. He's ready to leave. He should go to the NFL. If he were to ask me to my face, I would tell him to go to the NFL. But at the same time, I think Kyron Williams loves playing for Notre Dame. And if he sees that there's an opportunity to A, win a national championship, but B, also maybe win a Heisman next year, it's really going to only be his third year as the running back. So there's an argument to be made that, he doesn't have the tread on the tires that some guys do, when they're going into their senior season, like a Jonathan Taylor or something like that when he was at Wisconsin. So all of this stuff, I mean, if someone like that ends up staying, I mean, imagine the offense next year with everything I just said plus Kyron Williams. And I didn't even mention Michael Mayer. And, he's going to be a junior next year. He's not someone who's even eligible to go to the draft yet. So some of that stuff aligned with a quarterback that can bring you over the top. I'm just saying. I mean, that's really where I want to see if Notre Dame can get to that point, because I saw it last year against Clemson personally, that they could compete for a national championship if the offense can get to that point.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, the initial point that you were making about, the difference between, Clemson with Trevor Lawrence and Clemson without Trevor Lawrence is very apparent. And, that's kind of, we went through the whole topic of conversation earlier this year about, Jack Cohn versus Drew Pine. Well, there's a reason why, Notre Dame is not investing a whole lot of time into developing Drew Pine. And it's because, and people called him Ian Book 2.0, and those comparisons make sense for a lot of reasons. Well, guess what? Ian Book wasn't good enough to win you a national championship. Just because he didn't, there wasn't enough playmaking, just, the quote unquote balling out wasn't there with Ian Book. There wasn't Ian Book was a great quarterback. I would have taken Ian Book with this particular Notre Dame team for another year if that would had to have been an option. but
They'd be undefeated with the Eagles
not.
right now, for sure.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And so, I'm not trying to. I don't know. I'm not trying to dog on Ian Book, but I think you get what I'm saying. And to your point about Kyron Williams, real quick, I just wanted to touch on what you said about him. I'm with you. I think Kyron Williams will probably leave, especially at running back positions. It seems like the quicker guys can get out of college and go make their first contract, because the shelf life of a running back is so short. It's to their benefit to go make money as quick as possible, because they're not going to be in the NFL for all that long, or at least be really, really effective for a very long time. However, I do also agree with the fact that you said, I do think Kyron Williams loves being a Notre Dame football player. I mean, I think that's very apparent. And so it wouldn't completely shock me. And then especially in the area of NIL and all of that, if he comes back and Notre Dame can put a Heisman campaign through him, I mean, he can make a little bit of money while he's at Notre Dame too. So, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see. I mean, this is obviously the first time we've had the name, image, and likeness stuff going on. It'll be interesting to see how guys make some of those decisions, because now generally there's a cost analysis. I mean, how much more money will he make in the NFL if he leaves after this year versus one more year of Notre Dame experience with maybe a Heisman Trophy contention under his belt at the very least. And so we'll sort of see. I mean, we're kind of in uncharted waters with that. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out. However, if he does leave, and I'll kind of end this point with this thought, I'm pretty comfortable with Logan Diggs and Chris Tyree as being the guys next year. Especially you get Sebo into the rotation a little bit more. And some of the younger guys coming up. I won't sit and name everybody in the running back room, but I think the running back room at the very least is what I would call something that even without Kyron Williams next year, I still would feel pretty confident as being experienced and good for Notre Dame.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't. If Kyron Williams left, it's not like the running back room's gonna be bad. They're not necessarily going to be as good, because I think Kyron Williams is just simply that good. Another guy I would actually throw in there that you didn't mention is the freshman coming in, Jadarian Price. I'm a huge fan of his. I actually think, at least we get caught up when guys are actually on campus because they show things. So like Logan Diggs, for example, is starting to show things, so people are higher on him. I was actually very high on him coming out of high school, even though he was a 3-star guy. So what he's doing right now is really no surprise in my opinion. But just from a recruiting overall standpoint, I think Jadarian Price is the best running back they're going to land in a while, actually. So if he can come in and stabilize that room with Williams gone as well, then that's just another guy to add into the mix. But a point I wanted to bring up with maybe keeping Williams, and some of this is, I think, a little overrated, but one of the best things Alabama does on the recruiting trail is keeping guys sometimes for their senior year. They kept Devonta Smith for his senior season, won the Heisman. They kept Najee Harris for his senior season, won a national championship alongside the Heisman winner. And they've done that with a few other guys. And again, it's one of those things where it's hard to fault a kid for leaving. And I think Notre Dame's actually done a pretty good job of keeping some guys in the past. Manti Te'o comes to mind, and then they go play for the national championship at his senior season. They kept Tyler Eifert for his senior season when he probably could have went pro. Same thing. I was 2012. I mean, if you don't have those two guys, is Notre Dame undefeated that season? Probably not. And actually, not even probably not. They're definitely not. And then you go and so kind of bringing up the Williams idea behind this is you bring Williams, and there's an argument to be made that Notre Dame's team goes from an 11-1 or 10-2 roster next year with some of the teams that they play to maybe being a 12-0 team or a one-loss team. They play Clemson and Ohio State. Maybe you win one of those, maybe you lose one of those. Especially because I expect that Clemson will probably be significantly better next year than they are right now. So yeah, no, I mean that's a recruiting win that Notre Dame could have on the trail, specifically next year. And again, it's one of those things where you're not going to fault that kid if he leaves, and it certainly shouldn't be on the coaching staff if he decides to leave. Because again, if he goes to Brian Kelly, I think Brian Kelly should be honest with him on his chances of being a player in the NFL, because I think that's what a good coach would do.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, certainly he has the NFL skill set. I mean, he's got, I talk about his pass blocking, I feel like on every single podcast that I'm ever on. But he had even just a couple tonight where I'm sitting in my living room like, oh, like you can just the collision in pass blocking just continues to astound me with him. I mean, he's got a full game, I guess is what I'm trying to tell you. So yeah, I mean, he's a genuine NFL prospect. Especially because, he can do everything. He can break the tackles. He can get the tough yards. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He can pass block. He's an NFL running back because he's got a full game. And, testament to Lance Taylor. I mean, he's done a really good job developing him and others in that running back room. So yeah, I mean, if I had to put money on it, he's going to be, he's going to be in the NFL next year. But, that doesn't mean I don't want to sit here and cross my fingers and hope he comes back either.
Yeah. And it's funny to that point, Johnny Bays threw up an interesting statement here. It's certainly bold. I don't know if I agree with it. But at the same time, Diggs is a very good player. So if Kyron walks, and we've already talked about this a couple times now, but if Kyron does walk and go to the NFL, then Notre Dame's running back room should still be in pretty good hands. But guys, I just want to throw this out here again. Thanks for tuning in. Post game show. Me and Ben are here with you every week. I actually probably will not be here next week. Me and Ben need to discuss this off camera. I'm going to be in attendance for the Notre Dame Georgia Tech game, so we'll probably be hammered once that game ends and won't be able to join this show immediately or anything like that. And I'm sure, assuming Ben can help you guys out and jump on, it will be a good show regardless. But if you guys are liking what you're hearing on an everyday basis, make sure you're contributing to the live show. Again, it's the post game show at the Voice of College Football. You can Venmo at the Voice of College Football or Mark Rogers, like I said, on Venmo. I think you can also do it on this stream if we have it set up correctly. I hope we do, and we enjoy your comments. But at the same time, even if you don't need to or want to contribute, I should say, and you just want to contribute with your voice, ask those questions. And like I said, we're here every week, and we enjoy the commentary back and forth with you guys. Ben, I don't know. I mean, is there anything else that you think is sort of, up there? I mean, Johnny Bays is still kind of talking about this, and yeah, we definitely didn't take this as a knock on Williams. It's definitely a compliment to Diggs, and I agree with you. He's certainly bigger than Williams, and probably a more traditional 3-down back. In regards to that, I mean, I guess Williams is a traditional three-down back with the way he plays. It's hard to argue with, but from a look standpoint, you could argue that Diggs has that look for sure.
I think that just to chime in on that last little comment right there. I mean, a good way to look at it, I think, is that, and you kind of mentioned, a little bit ago, talking about Alabama recruiting their guys back, their juniors that could leave to the NFL. We're getting them to come back. I mean, I think it's very obvious that, playing with Kyron Williams helps Logan Diggs. I mean, you can Logan Diggs had a play earlier where, he was hit 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage on a 3rd and 1 or something like that in the first half, and breaks it for 6, 7, 8 yards, picks up the first down. I mean, you can see to a certain degree the kind of effect that playing with and watching Kyron Williams has had on Logan Diggs. He liked Kyron Williams on that particular play. Now, I mean, I don't know. So I guess what I'm saying in a roundabout way is that, Kyron Williams, if he comes back, Logan Diggs comes back that much better because he's got that guy to compete with, that guy to continue to learn from, and that type of stuff. and so I really like that point that you made about, what Alabama does. I mean, and so it kind of goes back to what we were saying, if Notre Dame can convince, hey, Kyron, guess what? We're going to go ahead and we're going to go put together, and you tweeted this to me earlier today, we're going to go put together, not 33 trucking like they did for Josh Adams, but something like that, find some sort of a catchy, yeah, like that would be lame. Like we got to find something completely different, but some sort of like catchy something or another, and put together that campaign in the way that they did. We're going to do that for you. You've got the opportunity to go elsewhere and make money from companies or whatever. Like, there's a legitimate pitch to Kyron Williams to come back. So I don't know. We've talked about this for a long time, but and like I say, if Kyron Williams comes back, that's better in my opinion for Logan Diggs's long-term career. And that's what I was kind of trying to say when I was stuttering and rambling just a little bit ago. It's just good for Notre Dame's program altogether, the running back room and just Notre Dame's program in terms of, having one of your best leaders back again. So yeah, I mean, regardless, like I say, Kyron Williams or not next year, I mean, Notre Dame is going to be in a good spot, but man, I really want to have him back. So I don't know. I'll stop now.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's kind of an underrated point to the whole topic there is if he were to return, not only are you getting one of the best players in college football, just in general, but you're also getting one of your best leaders. And I don't think that can be understated. And in reality, there are a lot of guys that could return to this roster that could make it just so much better. I'm going to leave Kyle Hamilton out of this because when you're a top 5 pick in the draft, you just don't come back. He's not the type of player that should ever come back. And again, that's not a knock on him. That's not hey, Notre Dame needs to recruit him better to come back. Alabama wouldn't recruit Kyle Hamilton back to Alabama. That's a Jamar Chase level talent on the opposite side of the football that's just never going to come back. But you have guys like Jarrett Patterson who could come back for his 5th year and be maybe the best center in college football and lead the offensive line. You have Isaiah Foskey who can come back, who's been definitely trending up in draft boards with, close to 10 sacks. Maybe he's there. I don't think he had a sack today, even though Notre Dame had 8 or 9, which is crazy to think about. But he's a guy that could come back and be an absolute terror, rushing the passer. Jason Adamalola is another guy. There's been a lot of rumors of him being a guy that who has a year of eligibility that could leave for the NFL, but he is certainly a guy that if you brought him back, just bolsters the defensive line significantly. Maybe some lesser guys. I mean, just again, on the offensive side of the ball, maybe being able to get Avery Davis back for a 6th year, convincing Kevin Austin that he might not be 100% ready for the NFL only after 1 year of really good college football play, getting those guys back who I think in Kevin Austin's case, it's probably to a lesser extent because I think he is coming back. But then maybe even keeping a few guys out of the portal. A guy like Tariq Bracy, who's been pretty good for them in the slot, he could easily go to another roster and be the starter on the outside. But keeping him at Notre Dame and having him as a 5th-year guy that can compete in the slot for you, I think that's important. So there are definitely some guys on this roster where if they weren't, not necessarily, like I said, the Kyle Hamilton types or even the Kyron Williams types, if you were able to keep them on this roster, it makes next year's team, I think just on paper going in, just significantly better overall.
Yeah. And like guys like Xavier Watts and things like, you could see him being like, oh my goodness. Like, I know he's starting to sort of, find his role on the defensive side, but you could eventually see him say, you know what, I want to play receiver. I want to go somewhere and play receiver. So I'm going to transfer. I mean, keeping those guys as well. I mean, I think the keeping the guys out of the portal thing is going to be big for Notre Dame, I feel like, because, the byproduct of having a lot of depth, I feel like is, some guys don't get to play as many snaps as they want to. And so if, you got guys who are unhealthy or feel like that's unhealthy for them, and it's an unhealthy thought process, like, hey, I'm not getting mine. That's what you want to avoid. And if you can get the buy-in that like you can be here, you can be a part of something bigger than yourself and that type of stuff. That's obviously something that's very important. So that's a really good point that you just made as well.
And I think in like a guy like Patterson's case, if he ends up leaving, you're having, 3/5 of your offensive line gone again after losing 4 out of 5 the previous year. And, granted, yes, there were some arguments, at least early on, that guys like Kane Madden and Josh Lugg maybe aren't the guys and you can replace them fairly easily. And that might still be the case. I mean, you get Blake Fisher back next year. Rocco Spindler will be in the program for another season. And you'll have, Alt and Kristofic and, Zeke Carell can probably fill in at center, admirably. Can't talk right now, but you'd probably be fine and you wouldn't have the issues that you had at the beginning of this season, certainly. But, you bring Jarrett Patterson back. That's 3 guys that have been starting now for several games on the left side and in the middle. And then really you're only replacing 2 guys that some people think are your worst 2 starters on the offensive line. So there's arguments that it could be better. So again, it's right now it's probably neither here or there. And we'll obviously find a lot of this stuff out and it will sort itself out. And it's stuff that you can't really, predict or worry about because it's going to happen. But, they're certainly interesting because I think at least even going into this season, regardless of how Notre Dame has played, there were people that thought this was sort of a rebuilding year of sorts or a retooling year of sorts. And then that next year and the year after would be the years that, you're competing again for a national championship. And just so happens that Notre Dame, I think, is in a good spot right now where even on a down year, they're having success and probably going 11-1 or 10-2, whatever it is, depending on the season. And it's more of a rebuild or more of a retool than a rebuild. But then you have next year with all the other guys that, supposedly are going to bring the program back to, a couple years past.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly don't really have, a whole lot to add. I mean, your point on the offensive line. I mean, I would even argue that if you were able to bring Jarrett Patterson back, you're really at that point almost just replacing one offensive lineman because I think you feel like Blake Fisher is would have been fine this year had he got the opportunity to continue to play. And so, I guess a positive byproduct of that is, well, you got Joe Alt a whole lot of opportunity at left tackle. Maybe he moves to right next year and Blake Fisher's your left tackle or whatever the situation is. And even the guys that you talked about that, not you, but that we talked about as Notre Dame fans throughout, that struggled throughout the first part of the year, Zeke Carell, but even like Michael Carmody, Tosh Baker. I mean, those guys, they got some experience this year and another year in the weight room. I mean, those guys, are good offensive. I mean, they're playing at Notre Dame. They're good offensive linemen. They were good offensive linemen in high school, dominant. At some point, once they start playing against, guys that are, on there that don't have like, the George Karloftises of the world. Okay. And when they start playing against guys that only have the same amount of experience as them, then they're going to start to look better too. So, I mean, you're going to talk about having hopefully 7 or 8 offensive linemen that you feel pretty decent about because they have some experience. They've shown certain things at certain times. They got another year in the weight room. And obviously then you only have to fill 5 spots out of those 7 or 8 offensive linemen. So, and you generally feel pretty decent about 4 or 5 of them to begin with. So, that's where I hope, this season has taken Notre Dame is that they've had to endure some things, but that the stuff that they endured is really going to, and I keep talking about the window. Like I say, next year or the year after, I think that's the window. So, yeah, I mean, that's all I got to say about that, I guess.
Well, and then you're really building some cohesion on the offensive line if Patterson comes back, because really, like you mentioned, you have Fisher and some of the other guys. Let's just say next year's offensive line is Joe Alt and Fisher at tackle, whichever spot. Pick one. Then you have Kristofic, Patterson, and then like let's just say Rocco Spindler is your starting right guard. The next season, you're only losing Patterson. Hopefully, Carell is still there. I mean, that could easily be a guy that transfers out if he's not getting his time. But let's just say Carell's there, then you're only replacing one guy. And even if he's not there, you're still only replacing one guy. It just depends who's going to be the center at that point. And then those guys could all be there even the next season. So you're looking at, possibly only replacing one guy or no guys, for 2 or 3 seasons down the line, which could really, really bode well for Notre Dame, being offensive line recruiting the way they do. You're looking at all of those guys as, 4th year or 5th year seniors at one point in time. And maybe Tyler Buckner at that point's a senior or whatever, wherever he's at, or whoever your quarterback is at the time. Maybe it's Walker Howard, who they're after this year as another 5-star kid. Maybe, whoever it is. I mean, you're at that point where hopefully the recruiting's there that we've been talking about during this, 55 minutes of ranting about it. But if the recruiting is really there to the better than what it's been in the past and what it seems to be trending towards, especially on the offensive side of the ball, because I think the defensive side of the ball, we all understand they've recruited well and it's only getting better. But let's just say you have this offensive line unit we're talking about. You put in an elite quarterback, maybe some elite, receivers in the running game, and then you're competing for a national championship, and not just getting there, but you're actually competing, I guess is what I'm really getting at. That was the long-winded way of saying all that.
I just think it's interesting as we kind of, I assume you want to come to a close here, but it's interesting that, we're talking about this, an hour or whatever it is after a Notre Dame Virginia football game. And we haven't really talked about, we talked about it at the top. We haven't really talked about the game all that much. And we generally always do this, right? And it just kind of, and I think the point that I want to make about that is that, it's how refreshing is it that, we talk about Notre Dame and, the big picture and that type of stuff. And we don't have to sit and nitpick about, and break down this play that happened in a Virginia football game, or you get what I mean? That, we're talking about something bigger than just, one football game. I don't know that in many recent years, genuinely, that you could do that. I mean, I don't know. At the very least, Notre Dame has gotten to a point where those are conversations about, how this fit into like a bigger picture. And we're not just like micro talking about small things that happened, in one football game all that often. I mean, certainly we're going to sit and talk about some plays and decisions that get made in a game, but it's all in the context of something bigger than one game. And, I kind of like that, because I don't want to sit and talk about, every little decision that gets made and every play and this and that. How refreshing is it that we've gotten at least to this point as Notre Dame football fans and semi-quasi analysts, whatever you want to call us.
Well, and I think it sort of, and then we'll get going here after this point, unless you have a follow-up. But I think it almost puts into perspective too a little bit, how lucky to an extent. Like, I mean, obviously there's the Alabamas, the Clemsons, the Ohio States, like people that are actually like fans and teams that are actually like, hey, we're going to win the national championship this year. And if we don't, we're probably going to be one of the top 4 teams. We're getting to the point where we're very close to saying, hey, we're going to be one of the top 4 teams, or very close to that, and not necessarily competing for the national championship when we get there. But the one thing I kept thinking about, to your point, is let's just say there's the Virginia post-game show out there after tonight's game. There's no chance in hell the same people that are commenting on Virginia football are talking about this bigger picture that we're bringing up, that, hey, there's a chance that we can win a national championship in 3 or 4 years. And again, there's probably people out there that also say that we're dumb for doing it too, because we haven't done it since 1988 and we're never going to beat Alabama, or so on and so forth. But at least there's been like these slivers of hope, I guess, if that makes any sense. And certainly the recruiting's there. I mean, you can't argue with recruiting. Notre Dame right now is the 3rd ranked recruiting class in college football for 2022. They're the 3rd ranked class in college football for recruiting in 2023. those numbers probably won't stand, but I doubt they're going to move past number 10. So there's not really 10 programs better than Notre Dame, whether it's on the field or recruiting. And that's been proven over the last, essentially since 2016, really. After that year, I mean, Notre Dame consistently from 2017 to now has probably been a top 10 or better program in college football. And that goes from all standards, whether it's recruiting, whether it's coaching, whether it's players on the field, record-wise, getting to the college football playoff, so on and so forth. So 100%, I agree with your point that it's nice having this bigger picture as a Notre Dame fan, because we didn't necessarily always have that, like in the Charlie Weiss years, the Tyron Willingham years, maybe even at some points during the Brian Kelly years. But it does make you sort of appreciate some of the other fans out there that know they know there's never a chance, regardless of who their team is. And like I mentioned Virginia, but Notre Dame plays Georgia Tech next week. Georgia Tech fans aren't thinking college football playoff in the next 10 years or 15 years, probably. They're just hoping they beat Georgia from time to time.
Yeah, and same thing with Stanford. Look how far they've fallen off. I mean, like at one point they were having similar conversations, like how do we take the next step and contend, and then it never happened for them. So, and I don't obviously foresee that happening at Notre Dame just based off of the recruiting and the things that you're talking about. So, there's that to also think about as well. But we'll leave it there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, guys, as always, thanks for joining the post-game show with us. Ben and I are always grateful for your viewership and your questions. So it keeps the show going for probably more than 15 minutes, especially if it was just me or him by ourselves. That would be, it's certainly a pain in the ass sometimes when that has to be the case. But again, Notre Dame wins 28-3 today against Virginia. Sets up a matchup against Georgia Tech next week that I'll gratefully be at to hopefully go 10-1. I won't be on the show next week. Hopefully Ben will, but if not, someone will be here for you guys to bring the post game. And if Ben is, if you need to bring someone on with you, feel free. You have my blessing on that. I'm sure you have Mark Rogers' blessing on that as well. So again, guys, thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you here soon.